She's like a sickness in my brain, a vision standing by the window pane. She ripples through the blinds and leaves me in a daze. It's in the way her body moves me, the way she grabs me and intoxicates, until the signals in my mind forget to operate. Fragile skull. I take my pleasure from my alcohol. She'll never give you any time at all. She just comes in.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another coffee and crime time. Today we're talking about the disappearance and subsequent murder of 13-year-old Dylan Redwine. We're also going to talk about Dylan's pathetic excuse for a father, Mark Redwine, or as I've taken to calling him, Letitia Stout with a penis. This case has been highly requested. I just got a request for it the other day. I can't remember who it was, and I don't even think I responded to them. I just remember seeing the name, and I said, yep, I need to do this now. Now's the time. I've been following the case, but I was waiting for the trial so that I would know the actual and real details of the case. But this trial, it just kept getting pushed back for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons was Mark Redwine's attorney being arrested for domestic abuse. But anyways, Mark Redwine was finally able to be judged by a jury of his peers. And when you look at all the evidence stacked up and you hear from the people who knew and loved Dylan, it's all so mind-blowing. And you wonder how anyone could be so heartless and so cruel, not only to a child, but to their own child. And of course, it seems like the worst stuff happens in Colorado. And now we are back there. But before we dive in and I get upset, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Casetify. Let's seriously talk about Casetify because protection for your phone is important. And Casetify is protection with personality. Casetify's Impact and Ultra Impact cases are the slimmest, most protective cases out there. They are engineered with a 2-layer construction of Chi-Tech material and drop test approved for up to 6.6 feet for the impact cases and 9.8 feet for the Ultra Impact cases. And they have protected my phone through many a drop, and sometimes even an outright throw. Even though I never throw my phone on purpose, it just seems to magically fly out of my hand at high speed periodically throughout the day. Casetify cases don't just protect your phone from breaking, however, they protect you from all those scary germs that are just floating around, waiting to keep you up all night long with a stuffy nose. You know what I'm talking about. Casetify's antimicrobial coating keeps your case germ-free and kills 99% of bacteria. And if all of that wasn't enough, Casetify's cases look great too. And they allow you to show your personality without sacrificing protection. They have tons of designs to choose from and many different personalization options, so your phone case is truly a product of your own creativity. Pick your favorite color or print. You can add your name or a monogram in whatever font, style, or color you like. The sky's the limit. I have several personalized cases from Casetify. Actually, all of these 4 right here, I designed all of them. These 2 say Harlowe on them, and they are so eye-catching. I get tons of compliments on them when I'm out for dinner or in business meetings, especially this one, which is perfect for my ADD self because sometimes I just sit there and turn it over and over and over in my hands so I can watch the colors and the swirls, and I kind of get lost in it. It's like my own little meditation moment during the day. Casetify even has slim but sturdy leather cases that you can personalize in different colors and add text to. And their Ultra Impact and Impact cases are made with 50% recycled material, so you can feel good about your phone looking great. So the cases are made with impact-absorbing material. They have a raised bezel for top-to-bottom screen protection. Let's drop test this baby and see what happens. And I mean, at this point, I've done 5 or 6 drop tests for Casetify with this exact phone in this exact case, and it's still good. Still working, not broken. Perfect. I think you should head over and start creating your new favorite phone case right now. So go to casetify.com/stephanieharlowe today to get 15% off. That's casetify.com stephanieharlowe for 15% off. And there's an E on the end of Stephanie and at the end of Harlow. Thank you so much to Casetify for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. So first, let's talk about who Dylan was and explore some of his family dynamics. Dylan Nicholas Redwine was born on February 6, 1991, to his parents Elaine and Mark Redwine. Dylan also had a brother named Corey, who was 7 years older than he was, but despite this age gap, the two boys were very close growing up. Corey would later say they were best friends, and by the time Dylan went missing, Corey had taken on a fatherly role for his younger brother, driving him to baseball practice and to school, talking to him about girls, and offering him fatherly advice when it was needed. Corey and Dylan grew up in the mountains of southwest Colorado in a place called Bayfield. It seemed that for several years, Mark Redwine was a pretty good father. He was even a stay-at-home dad for some time when Dylan was younger, which led to a special and close bond between father and son. But after 18 years of marriage, Elaine and Mark got divorced in 2007, and she was granted full custody of both their sons. I think one of the reasons she was granted full custody was, I believe it was 2001 or 2003, something like that, where Mark was charged with child abuse, but I could not find the details about that. Mark was allowed visitation, but after the divorce, he was distant physically and emotionally, and he rarely took advantage of his visitation rights. For a while, Elaine and Mark lived in separate homes after they were separated, and when Elaine remarried, she moved to Colorado Springs with her new husband, Michael Hall, in June of 2012, and she took Dylan with her. Corey stayed behind for a few months to tie up some loose ends, and he joined them in the following August. Dylan was a joyful kind of kid who had a rambunctious side to him. His brother Corey said that Dylan was an extremely gifted athlete, and he knew it, so he enjoyed showing off his skills, whether he was playing baseball or football. Dylan loved to be active and be outside, but he also liked to play video games, and he could constantly be seen all day long communicating with friends and family from his cell phone or his iPod if he had Wi-Fi. He was really technologically savvy, he was really interested in technology, and he always had some sort of device with him. Relationships and loyalty were very important to Dylan, and it meant a lot to him that he maintained contact with his friends back in Bayfield after he moved to Colorado Springs. While they were living with their mother and stepfather, Corey and Dylan would periodically visit with their father. Sometimes it would be for a week or a weekend, whatever Mark Redwine's schedule as a long-haul truck driver would allow. But the divorce and following custody disputes had been contentious, and it seemed Mark had started talking very negatively about Dylan's mother, Elaine, and it had caused a decline in the relationship between Mark and his son, Dylan, who was reaching his teenage years. There also seemed to have been some sort of family argument or fight in 2010, during which Dylan had witnessed his father's explosive temper firsthand, and apparently he never saw him the same way after that. There would also be other things that Dylan would discover about his father the following year that would alter their relationship forever. So in 2012, when the courts mandated that 13-year-old Dylan was going to spend the Thanksgiving holiday with his father, he voiced his unwillingness to do so. Dylan said that he wanted to stay with his mother and celebrate Thanksgiving with her family, especially his grandmother, who had recently been diagnosed with cancer. Elaine asked her lawyer, Amber Harrison, if there was any way that Dylan did not have to go to his father's, and Amber talked to Dylan privately, and he told her that he didn't want to be around his father. But there was nothing that Elaine or Amber Harrison could do, and Harrison informed Elaine that if she didn't put Dylan on a plane, she would be found in contempt of court. The last time Elaine saw her son alive was on November 18, 2012, when she watched him walk away to board a plane that would deliver him to his murderer. Dylan told his mother goodbye and started walking away, but then Elaine called him back and she was like, "What, are you too old to give your mom a hug?" So he ran back, he hugged her, he waved goodbye, and then he was gone, just like that. Elaine would later say, quote, "I figured he was safe because he was with his dad," end quote. When Dylan landed in Durango, Colorado, a city about 30 minutes away from where Mark Redwine lived in Bayfield, he sent his mother a sad face emoji. Mark Redwine picked Dylan up from the airport, and video surveillance shows their next two stops were to Walmart to pick up some things, and then to the McDonald's drive-thru to grab some food. In the Walmart surveillance video, there seems to be tension between Dylan and his father, with Dylan appearing to be standoffish towards Mark. After that, Mark drove to his home at 2343 County Road 500, which is in a pretty rural area. After they got home, Dylan texted his best friend in Bayfield, Ryan Nava, and asked if he could spend the night. Apparently, this idea was run by Mark, and he said no. So Ryan told Dylan to come over very early the next morning at 6:30 a.m. Ryan and Dylan had been best friends since they had physically collided in the dollar store. And Ryan said that when the two of them were together, they were always up to something, like typical young boys. They had a very tight bond. Ryan today is a 21-year-old man, just as Dylan would be 21 years old today. And Ryan still has a basketball that belonged to his best friend Dylan. And he brought this basketball to college with him. College, an experience that Dylan Redwine will never get to have. Another friend of Dylan's, her name was Amanda Saxton. She'd been texting with him back and forth that night. They were talking about movies and television shows, and Dylan told Amanda that he'd been watching Adventureland. But suddenly, their conversation abruptly ended when Dylan stopped responding. According to cell phone records, the last activity on Dylan's cell phone that night was a text he got from his mother around 10 p.m. She texted, "How are you, son? Doing okay?" But Dylan never responded. No one ever talked to Dylan again after that night. Mark said that after he and Dylan had gotten home, they'd thrown a Nerf football around outside for a bit, and then they'd watched a movie that he'd purchased at Walmart. Mark said he went to bed around 9:30 or 10, and he said that Dylan was still awake at this point, but he probably didn't stay up much longer. The next morning, Dylan's friend Ryan texted him at 6:45 a.m., asking where he was, because remember, Dylan was supposed to go to Ryan's at 6:30. According to Mark Redwine, he himself woke up fairly early that morning at 5:45 a.m., and he apparently was planning to bring Dylan to his friend Ryan's house. And Mark said he got ready for the day, and he kept himself busy until 7:30 when he tried to wake Dylan up, who was sleeping on the couch. Dylan wouldn't wake up, so Mark left without him and went to his office to meet with his lawyer. So Dylan's got to go to Ryan's at 6:30. Mark's up at 5:45, but he doesn't attempt to wake Dylan up till 7:30, and then he says he just cannot wake him up. Guilty conscience? Maybe you couldn't wake him up because by that morning, he was dead because you killed him. Mark's cell phone records show that he texted Dylan 4 times that day. At 8:14 a.m., he said, "Hey, bud, out of the office, call me." A minute later, at 8:15 a.m., he said, "Call me, please." At 11:23 a.m., Mark texted, "Dill, I'm home and you're nowhere to be found. Come back so I can get you to Bayfield. At least call me, okay?" And again, at 2:33 in the afternoon, Mark texted, "Dylan, you need to call me. Where are you?" During the time that he was sending these messages, cell phone tower data shows that Mark Redwine drove from his home to Durango, which is about 30 minutes away, and then back from Durango to his home. Mark also called Dylan's phone 7 times. The last time he called was at 9:32 that night, and he called again at 7:19 the next morning. After that, Mark Redwine never called or texted his son again. At 4:32 p.m. on November 19th, this is the day that apparently he couldn't wake Dylan up and he went to the office and then came back and Dylan was gone, Mark texted his ex-wife saying, "Elaine, I'm wondering if you have heard from Dylan. I've been trying to reach him all afternoon." And Elaine's immediate response to Mark is very telling. She wrote back, "It's really worrying when I'm 7 hours away and I get a message like this from you. I haven't heard from Dylan today. Where did you leave him or last see him?" 7 minutes later, Mark wrote back that he had gone into town earlier that morning, and when he had left, Dylan was fine, but he was worried because he hadn't been able to reach him. Elaine wrote back, "He wouldn't just leave. He would have called me. I am so suspect of you right now. How could he just disappear?" I'm sure she meant to type suspicious. "I'm so suspicious of you right now." But she was on her way home from work when she got this text, so she was probably driving and texting, hence the incorrect use of the word suspect. Mark told Elaine that he had just left the marshal's office where he had reported Dylan missing. This is around like 4:30 in the afternoon. But Elaine called the marshal's office and they didn't know anything. They didn't know anything about Dylan, and they certainly did not have a missing persons report for Dylan. Dylan's friend Ryan said that Mark went over to his house that day looking for Dylan, and Mark also made some calls to some of Dylan's other friends. But no one had seen the 13-year-old boy or talked to him since the previous night. Back in Colorado Springs, Elaine called her oldest son, Corey, who had just moved out of her house and gotten his own place, and she told him that Mark didn't know where Dylan was. He said he was on his way to her house, and Elaine drove home, packed a bag, and left Colorado Springs with her husband, Michael Hall, and her son, Corey, at around 5:30 p.m., arriving in Bayfield the next morning around 2:30 a.m., at which point she went straight to the marshal's office. It was there she found out that Mark had reported Dylan missing, but not until after 6 p.m. that evening, so a couple hours after he claimed he'd reported Dylan missing. Mark told the marshals that when he'd gotten home from his office, it was around 11:30 in the morning, and there was a bowl of cereal in the sink, and the television was on to Nickelodeon, but Dylan was nowhere to be found. So, his 13-year-old son is missing. He knows that he's missing since at least 11:30 in the morning. He knows that he isn't with any of his friends and that he hasn't even reached out to his mother yet. But it still took over 6 hours for Mark Redwine to report Dylan missing. So we have Elaine, Corey, and Michael driving 7 hours to search for Dylan. But what was Mark Redwine doing? Well, Pine River Deputy Fire Chief Roy Vreeland got a message to his pager on November 19th about a missing child. And he immediately responded, noting that it would be dark soon, making it much harder to search for the boy. When he arrived at Mark's house, first of all, he noticed a lot of liquor bottles around the house, inside the house, outside the house. But he said that Mark answered the door looking disheveled, and his demeanor was very laid back and nonchalant. Vreeland said, quote, "Typically, more people show a lot of emotion when someone is missing. I would say that Mark Redwine was concerned, but he was not frantic at all." End quote. That day, Vreeland was accompanied by a dog, and he'd brought this dog hoping to, find something in the house to grab Dylan's scent from so that they could start searching the surrounding areas for Dylan. But when Vreeland asked Mark for a scent article, which means something that belonged to Dylan that he wore or used often so that his scent would be on it, Mark was like, "There's nothing like that in this house." And Vreeland persisted, and he was like, "Listen, it could be anything, could be like a toothbrush, could be a cell phone charger, anything." But Mark responded that there was nothing in his house that had belonged to Dylan. So I get it, you don't have full custody of this kid. He's not there often, but he's there enough where you would think that you'd have some of his belongings there, like clothes that he can wear when he comes, a toothbrush, something that has Dylan's scent on it, especially since he spent, the whole last day with you. But Mark says he's got nothing. And if that's not a red flag all on its own, I don't know what is. As a last resort, Vreeland asked Mark to show him where Dylan slept, and he was led to the couch in the living room. Vreeland collected a pillowcase from the couch, but for some odd reason, the dog that he brought with him could not pick up Dylan's scent on it, even though it was the pillowcase Mark insisted Dylan had slept on the night before. The initial search for Dylan would continue until 1 a.m. that night that he went missing, or that day he went missing, because he's not seen since, 7:30 in the morning when Mark left the house to go to the office. And at this point, it's now 1 a.m. the next day, and they're still searching for him. But Mark Redwine was not searching for him. In fact, Vreeland noticed that by 11 p.m., all the lights inside and outside Mark's home had been turned off, like he was going to bed for the evening. Vreeland said, quote, "Most people tend to turn every light on and make sure their house is a beacon so that a missing person can find their way home, whether it's a spouse or a child. It was odd. Very odd." End quote. Most people, I think, also probably can't get much sleep while their child is missing. They can't just go to bed and shut the lights off and get a good night's rest, but Mark Redwine could. Mark's neighbor, Connie Cochran, would later testify that the previous night, the night that Dylan stopped responding to texts, Connie had noticed Mark's porch light was on at 2 a.m. when she'd gotten up to use the bathroom, and this was not typical for Mark. Connie said a few hours later, when she woke up for the day, it was still dark out, and she noticed someone had turned the light off. The implication being that Mark was up very late that night, even though he said he'd gone to sleep at 10 p.m. at the latest. So he's up very late on the night that his son just stops texting anybody and doesn't respond to text or calls. And nobody heard from him after that. I wonder what he was doing. The search picked up at 7 a.m. the next morning, and by this time, Elaine, her husband, and Corey were there to participate. But Mark Redwine, once again, did not. Vreeland said that while he was busy setting up a base of operations across the street from Mark's house, Mark stood outside with a steaming cup of coffee and sat on his porch and just observed as everyone rushed around looking for his son and putting a plan of action into place. Mark didn't seem interested in helping at all, nor did he offer to. Those who did care about finding Dylan went door to door. They searched nearby woods and abandoned buildings. Mark Redwine never asked anyone how the search was going or if they'd found anything. Mark did tell the police that he wondered if Dylan had gone fishing, something Mark claimed Dylan loved to do, even though Corey, Dylan's older brother, would later testify that it wasn't Dylan's favorite thing to do. Yeah, Dylan loved being outside no matter what he was doing, but fishing wouldn't be his first choice. He didn't even know how to tie a lure by himself, even though he was trying to learn, but he hadn't gotten to that point yet. So how is Dylan going to go fishing by himself if he doesn't even know how to tie a lure by himself? Mark said that he'd searched all over his house for Dylan's fishing pole, and he couldn't find it. And that's what made him think Dylan had gone fishing. So he told the police that Dylan's favorite area to fish was a little lake kind of 9 miles away. Now, months later, Mark magically found Dylan's fishing pole in the garage, months later. And he gave it to the police. But by that point, they had decided that the whole fishing story was just a tactic to have law enforcement searching in the wrong place, 9 miles away from Mark's home, when it turns out Dylan was a lot closer than that. On November 24th, cadaver dogs picked up Dylan's scent at the edge of Vallecito Lake, and law enforcement utilized both divers and sonar, but they found nothing. Police started exploring the possibility that Dylan had run away, probably because Mark was pushing that narrative. Now, the articles and the papers and everything, they say that police were exploring this possibility. I don't think they were. I think they just told people that, they were telling people, we don't have a person of interest. We don't really have a suspect. We don't even know if we suspect foul play at this point. This is kind of what they were saying in the early days and weeks of Dylan's disappearance. But I think from the get-go, they suspected Mark. In fact, I don't just think that. There's several law enforcement officials and first responders who said that they suspected Mark right from the beginning. So I think it was just a way to sort of throw the public off, and not so much throw the public off, but throw Mark off. Have him be able to relax and maybe make a mistake or say something that would point to him because he thought that the police weren't even looking in his direction. But anyways, Mark was the one who started pushing that narrative that Dylan might have just wandered off, that Dylan might have run away. And Dylan's mother, Elaine, pushed back against this theory hard, saying, quote, Dylan wouldn't have left willingly. If there was any way to communicate, he would have called. Dylan is a generational kid and very tech savvy. He wouldn't have gone to the mountains to pitch a tent or build a fire, end quote. And that was something that I think Mark had suggested at one point, because Dylan, if he ran away, where did he go, right? He wasn't with any of his friends in the Bayfield area. Nobody or none of his friends in Colorado Springs had seen him. So Mark, I think, said something like maybe he's just hanging out in the wilderness, in the woods, just hiding. And Elaine's like, no, man, Dylan loves his phone, his Wi-Fi, his video games. He's not that type of kid. And both Elaine and Corey said that if Dylan had run away, he wouldn't have run away to hide in the woods. He would have run to them. He would have run to Corey, who's been his father figure. He would have run to Elaine, who he loved very much. Or he would have even gone to Elaine's new husband, Michael Hall, who he trusted and had a good relationship with. If he had run away from Mark Redwine's, everybody could understand that, because Dylan didn't really like Mark, but nobody could understand how he wouldn't have called his mother or his brother or his stepfather. On November 25th, the La Plata County Sheriff's Office called in the FBI. they said that they were having some trouble rectifying some of Mark's statements about what happened with Dylan. So they wanted the FBI to come in and sort of help them with that. And I really give the La Plata County Sheriff's Office credit for this, because I know that a lot of local police agencies sometimes have a hard time calling in the FBI. They're almost like feeling that it's shameful, like they're admitting that they can't handle it on their own. But just within a couple of days of Dylan being missing, the FBI were called in, and I think it really made a big difference in this case, so good for you guys. It's really important when law enforcement, or really anybody involved in a case, puts aside their ego for the benefit of the victim. Special Agent John Grusing traveled from Denver, where he was located, to Durango, and he would meet with Mark 3 times. The first time, Agent Grusing asked Mark to write a free narrative. And a free narrative is basically a story that organizes experiences or events so that someone who doesn't know the story can be informed of exactly what happened. So in writing, when you're writing a free narrative, you're told, like in classes, imagine you saw something or something happened to you, and you're trying to explain it to somebody who wasn't there, and you want to explain it to them in a way that makes them feel as if they were there. That's what a free narrative is. Now, Special Agent Grusing says he did this so that he could see the places in Mark's account where Mark was either extremely vague or extremely detailed. He found that Mark Redwine was very detailed about the events of November 18th, from the McDonald's drive-thru to throwing the Nerf football around, and he even offered details about how he and Dylan had been roughhousing that night, kind of just like rolling around, and I don't know what he means by roughhousing, but I assume it's like wrestling, together, and this made him happy because he could tell that the tension between him and his son was subsiding, allegedly. Now, Agent Grusing asked him, you guys were roughhousing. Did Dylan get hurt at this point? Did something happen to him that caused him to, bleed? Was he okay? And Mark was like, no, he was absolutely fine. Nobody got hurt. He didn't get hurt at all. It was all cool. Remember that he says Dylan didn't get hurt, even though Agent Grusing gave him the opportunity to create a narrative where Dylan got hurt. Mark chose not to do that. Mark also said that the day after, when he'd found out Dylan was gone, he had assumed his son had gone fishing with a friend named Tristan, and that's when he searched for the fishing pole, and then he took an hour nap. So, your son's missing. You got home at 11:30. You haven't talked to him in hours. When you left, he was apparently sleeping peacefully just fine. You felt the need to say to Elaine that he was fine. Because, imagine, you can't find your kid and you call your husband or your wife and you're like, hey, I left so-and-so sleeping on the couch. Have you heard from them? Because I can't get a hold of them. Would you say, he was fine when I left? No, you just said he was sleeping. So that's enough to say he was fine. Why did Mark feel he had to, elaborate and even mention that Dylan was fine when he left? So anyways, your kid's missing. It's been hours. He's not with any of his friends. You can't find him. He's not answering his phone. You look for his fishing pole. You can't find it. So you take a nap. You take a nap while your 13-year-old son is out there somewhere. This is Colorado. This is a rural area. He's out there somewhere. You don't know where he is. You take a nap. Mark also said maybe Dylan had run away because of his mother, Elaine, which Agent Grusing found to be an odd statement because Dylan hadn't been with Elaine that day. He wasn't with Elaine when he ran away. She was hundreds of miles away. Dylan was with his father, Mark Redwine. So why would Dylan run away from Mark Redwine's house to escape Elaine? On November 27th, Agent Grusing paid Mark a visit at his home again, and he said that Mark answered the door looking even more disheveled than he had the day before, and his eyes were red, like he'd been crying or drinking. I think it's probably the latter, considering all the alcohol bottles that were found all over the house and outside the house. Probably drinking, probably not crying. Just my opinion, that don't come from me. Agent Grusing said that Mark was also clutching a pillow, and he told Grusing that this might have been the last thing that my son touched, so he's just going to walk around cradling this pillow. Now, here's the funny thing about that pillowcase, because remember, on the day Dylan was reported missing, Pine River Deputy Fire Chief Roy Vreeland had showed up to Mark's house with a sniffer dog, but the dog hadn't found Dylan's scent on that pillowcase, the one thing that Mark apparently had in the house that Dylan touched. Everything else in that house was not related to Dylan at all. Ray Randolph, this woman is a dog handler. She's a good one, too. And she'd already come to the conclusion by the time that Grusing talked to Mark for the second time that in her opinion, Dylan's scent was never on that pillowcase. She said she'd been contacted by the president of the search and rescue team that she was a part of, a search and rescue team that was searching for Dylan. And apparently there was some frustration on this team because several dogs had attempted to track Dylan's scent using that pillowcase, but they'd been unsuccessful. So Ray decided to perform an experiment with her dog, Selah, to see if the pillowcase was in fact a good scent article. Ray had a ball cap that Dylan's mother had brought with her from home. This is actually the scent article that allowed them to pick up Dylan's scent by the lake when they searched the lake area. Ray laid out 20 random items, including the pillowcase. So all of these items didn't have Dylan's scent on them, except allegedly the pillowcase. And then Ray gave Selah Dylan's hat so that she could pick up his scent. And then she set Selah on those 20 items. So if Dylan's scent was on that pillowcase, after picking up Dylan's scent from the ball cap, Selah should be able to pick out of those 20 items the pillowcase that had Dylan's scent on it. But she didn't indicate on any of those items. Ray replaced the pillowcase in the 20 items with a t-shirt of Dylan's, also provided by his mother. And she brought Selah back again because Selah's not in the room when this is happening because dogs are super smart, wicked smart, and they'd be like, oh, she's replacing something. Something's going on here. So Selah left the room. She brought Selah back in after she'd replaced the pillowcase with the t-shirt. And this time, Selah was able to track Dylan's scent to the t-shirt amongst the 20 items. So basically, Mark Redwine gave these people who were spending their time, their energy, desperately trying to find his son, he gave them a pillowcase that didn't even have Dylan's scent on it. Why would he do that? Why would he do that? Maybe because he didn't want them to pick up Dylan's scent? Maybe because he didn't want them to find Dylan? So in court, Ray Randolph testified, and when asked if Dylan's scent had ever been on that pillowcase, Ray responded, I would say with a high degree of probability that it was not. Here's my theory. I don't think Dylan ever went to bed that night. He never slept on that pillowcase. I mean, unless he slept on a pillowcase that Mark Redwine eventually got rid of. But I don't think that's what happened. I think he was killed that night. The night when his text to his friends just suddenly stopped. I think there was some kind of altercation that night. Mark killed him that night, so Dylan never slept on that pillow. So Agent Grusing returned to Mark's house for a third time on November 29th. This was the same day law enforcement executed a search warrant at the house, and Grusing was kind of there to let Mark know that they would be searching, but also to interview him again. So Grusing told Mark that the text would be in the home, and one of the main things they would be looking for was any sign that Dylan had been injured in that house. Now, prior to this, remember, Mark had been adamant that Dylan had not been injured. But when Agent Grusing took him to the FBI office that day for another interview, the story changed several times. Mark was like, actually, Dylan did have a cold sore on his lip that was oozing blood. So, yeah, maybe, he was bleeding. And Agent Grusing was like, oh, yeah, great. That's great information. No problem. I'm just going to verify that with Dylan's mother, this cold sore story, because, Elaine saw him the same day that you did, right? She put him on the plane that morning. I don't think he developed this oozing blood sore within a couple of hours. So I'm just going to verify with her. And Mark was like, wait, actually, no. That was somebody else that had a cold sore. Silly me. Actually, that day, when we were throwing the football around, Dylan got hit in the face with the football. The Nerf football, which is made completely of foam, and it busted open his lip, and his lip is bleeding and dripping on the floor. I don't know anybody who's ever gotten a busted lip from a Nerf football, but okay, maybe, I guess if it's thrown hard enough, right? I don't know. I'm sure there's going to be those contrarians in the comments who are like, actually, I've gotten hit with a Nerf ball before and bled. I'm sure y'all are out there, but listen, unless Mark Redwine has the arm of Josh Allen, who's got the strongest arm in the NFL, unless that's the case, I don't see it happening. I have a 9-year-old son. He hits me in the face with Nerf footballs all the time, not purposely. I miss and then hits me. Never have I bled, never even gotten a swollen lip. Then Mark revised this statement again, saying that after Dylan got hit in the face with a football, not only did he drip blood on the floor, he had spat blood onto the floor. Just in case you've got to explain some blood spatter that's in your house. Then Mark and Agent Grusing started talking about what could have possibly happened to Dylan. And Agent Grusing mentioned something about bears, at which point Mark Redwine perked right up. He got excited. Grusing said, quote, I believe it was me who said, what about a bear? And he got animated, and he said, we have bears around here. A bear could have got him. Mr. Redwine's reaction was not what I expected when I posed the theory of what if a bear got your son. He got excited, almost animated at the possibility, end quote. So imagine a parent. If an FBI agent or a law enforcement agent's like, oh no, there's bears around here. Could a bear have gotten him? The parent to be like, yes, great idea. Yes, that's exactly what could have. We have bears here. This is amazing. Thank you, kind sir. Mark Redwine was excited. And he was excited, in my opinion, because this was an alternate theory that his dumbass had not considered himself, and he was latching onto it. He was latching onto it with the enthusiasm of a man latching onto a rope while swinging over a lava tank full of hungry sharks. He was not going to let that go. Agent Grusing tried a different tactic. He said, listen, Mark, maybe it was an accident. Maybe things got out of hand. Maybe you guys were roughhousing, you were playing, and something happened to Dylan, and you didn't mean to hurt Dylan. It was just an accident. At that point, he claims Mark Redwine grew very quiet, and he leaned forward, with his shoulders slumped and his head down like this. And he stayed like this, quietly, for a few moments before responding, I have to think about myself. Dylan's mother, Elaine, told ABC News that she feared her ex-husband had done something to her son. She said, quote, I was married to Mark for a whole lot of years, and I know the way he reacts to things. If Dylan maybe did or said something that wasn't what Mark wanted to hear, I'm just afraid of how Mark would have reacted, end quote. And let's not blame Elaine for this, right? Let's not have the comments where, she knew something was going to happen to her son, or she feared something would happen to her son and she sent him there anyways. Did you not hear? There was a court order. Let's blame the court system. Let's blame the court system who still sent this child to his father when he expresses adamantly that he doesn't want to go. Why don't the courts listen to the kids? Why do the parents have more rights than the kids when it comes to something like this? And it's a very good question. Elaine went on to say that she didn't think Mark treated their son very well, and she wouldn't put it past him to have done something to Dylan to remove him from the picture, like a if I can't have him, no one will situation. Now, to be fair, although Elaine and Corey both suspected that Mark had something to do with what happened to Dylan, they did not think he had killed Dylan. They thought that he'd kind of hidden him away or, sort of had him stashed away somewhere so that Elaine would be hurt by that. They didn't initially think that Mark would have done this. Elaine also revealed that Mark had not been talking to her or their son Corey. They drove from Colorado Springs, they're searching for Dylan, and they'd both tried calling and texting, to update him or to ask him questions, but Mark never responded. And she couldn't understand, in a time like this, why he would be behaving in such an evasive way. Let's talk about what they found when law enforcement searched Mark's house and vehicle. According to the arrest affidavit, Dylan Redwine's blood was found in multiple locations in the living room, including the couch, the wood floor in front of the couch, the corner of the coffee table, on the floor beneath a rug, and on the love seat. Now, somehow, Mark Redwine was able to convince this woman, his ex-girlfriend, Karen Alexander, to testify and say that Dylan had cut his finger and bled all over the living room around Labor Day, 2011. This was a very convenient story since Mark's house had caught on fire and he hadn't been able to live there for several months while renovations were happening. A contractor who worked on the house testified to putting in new floors and all the furniture had to be replaced. Mark moved back into the house in April of 2011, and after that time, Dylan wasn't around a lot because Mark was working out of town. He was a truck driver. During a year period, he was only in Colorado for 90 days out of 365 or something. It was dramatic. He wasn't there a lot. So obviously Mark can't claim that the blood the police found was in his house from years before, when Dylan was there more often, when he lived there, because the blood was found on the couches, the love seat, the furniture that had been replaced, and the floors that had been replaced. And those floors hadn't even been in the house for 7 months when Dylan went missing. So, of course, citing Labor Day as the time that Dylan conveniently caught himself and bled everywhere, it was very strategic. Now, on the stand, this woman, Karen Alexander, she's like, I don't know what to tell you. That's what happened. He cut his finger. He was bleeding all over the place.
And you saw him come in. He had a paper towel on his finger, something like that?
No, he cut his finger at the sink in the house.
Oh, in the house. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
Yeah.
And he put a paper towel on it? Is that right?
Paper towel or napkin from the sink, because he was over by the sink and came over where I was.
And then she was cross-examined, and they were like, why didn't you ever tell the police this? You've talked to them several times. You've talked to the police and the FBI, but you never brought this up. And her only response was, well, nobody asked. So she's lying. Okay, she's lying. Allegedly. That's just my opinion. Karen Alexander, you're lying. Now, the blood being on the floor underneath the carpet suggested that someone had tried to clean the blood up because the rug did not test positive for blood. So it was believed that Dylan had bled on this rug and it had gone through to the floor, but the rug had either been cleaned or replaced because there was no blood on the carpet, but there was on the floor underneath it. That's pretty, impossible unless the rug got rolled up because somebody knew what they were about to do and knew that the rug would be harder to clean. I don't know, I'm just speculating. It was also suspected that someone had tried to clean up the blood because of how diluted the blood was. Former CBI agent Joe Clayton had used luminol to locate the blood, and when he saw all the different spots and all the different areas it was in, he felt that this had not been a localized bloodletting. Like somebody getting a bloody nose or cutting their finger. Clayton said, quote, "The blood on the couch and the love seat, of course. They were dark brown leather to begin with, difficult to see, not a lot of blood there, but it looked like it had been cleaned. Something had to happen there to make it so dilute. It was not just centralized in one place. If I had found stains in one area, I would think you'd had a localized bloodletting event. But this indicates movement. You have it on various pieces of furniture and under a rug," end quote. The question is, why would Mark want to kill his 13-year-old son, who he had previously claimed was the love of his life, whose name he had tattooed on his body?
We were inseparable. I mean, anywhere I was, he was right there beside me. He would come to me before he would go to his mom. I think in many ways that was part of the problems that developed in our relationship, was because while she was out earning a career, it was very difficult for her to lose sight of the fact that she wasn't there bonding with Dylan the way I was. And I think that that was a huge problem for her. And I think that that has been a problem for her for a long time now.
I mean, we can look at him and say he had the means to do this, he had the opportunity, but where's the motives? All the signs are pointing to Mark Redwine being sketchy AF, but what would his motive be? What could his motive possibly be? What kind of threat does a 13-year-old pose you? Well, law enforcement believes the tension between Mark and his son Dylan reached a head in 2011 when Mark was out of town and he got back into Colorado and he called his two sons, Corey and Dylan, and he said, "Pack some bags, we're hitting the road." Mark took Dylan and Corey to Michigan for Father's Day, and they spent some time going to baseball games, watching car races, just hanging out. But one day, while Mark was taking a nap, Dylan used his computer, and he found some things that would horrify and disgust him. Things that, of course, he had to show his brother, Corey. Now, these are pictures. I've seen these pictures. They were brought up during the trial. You can find them online. I can't put them in here. I know for a fact not only would I get demonetized, but YouTube would probably delete my entire channel. They're disgusting. They're awful. Awful. Ugh. Gross. So if you want to see them, you can find them. But just take my word for it. You probably don't want to see them. So these are pictures, selfies of Mark Redwine dressed in a woman's bra, wearing makeup and wearing a diaper. But that's not all he was doing. Apparently, the diaper that he was wearing was filled with human feces, like probably his own feces. And there were also pictures of Mark eating these human feces directly out of the diaper. Like, it's all over his face, okay? It's on his nose. It's all in his beard. And in these pictures, he appears to be enjoying himself immensely. It's just absolutely horrendous, no matter which way you slice this crazy pie. So Dylan sees these pictures and he's like, holy shit, right? And then he and Corey locked themselves in the bathroom of the hotel, and Corey actually used his own cell phone to take pictures of the pictures that were on the computer screen. Now, obviously, this discovery would have an impact on any child. And Corey said that after this, Dylan lost all respect for Mark. He no longer had a reason to look up to him or admire him like a young boy should be able to do with his father.
Can you explain to the jury what he found?
He found pictures of Mark dressed in women's clothing, wearing a diaper, taking selfies of him wearing the clothing, wearing the diaper, eating the feces that was in the diaper, and just that's pretty much it.
Dylan, back in 2011, was he 12 years old?
I believe so, yeah.
How did he react to seeing those photographs of his father?
He was pretty disgusted. It was something that he kind of had to try to contain himself. When we found the pictures, we were in the hotel room with Mark at the time, and Mark was sleeping, and Dylan was on his laptop, and I walked into the room. I had a conversation with my current wife, just checking up on her since I was on the road. And when I walked into the room, Dylan just kind of grabbed my attention, was trying to be quiet, but obviously was energetic, kind of, like, come here, I got to show you this, kept pulling me, and then he took me into the bathroom where we closed the door and locked it, and that's when he showed me the pictures that he had found.
Did it impact his view of the defendant moving forward?
Yes.
How so?
Dylan lost any reasons for him to look up to Mark that day.
Did you notice that in observing their relationship together from that point moving forward?
Yes.
It does not appear that Dylan showed these pictures to his father or even admitted to having seen them, at least not yet. And Dylan's mother, Elaine, says that she was not aware of the pictures or the existence of these pictures until after Dylan went missing. But not long after this, Mark and Dylan went on another trip, just the two of them. And apparently, while this was going on, Mark was bitching and complaining about Corey and Elaine because Corey and Mark had had a falling out. And Mark said some things about his mother and brother that Dylan was offended by, including that Mark believed Elaine and Corey were bad influences and bad role models. Corey said he remembers that whenever Dylan wanted to get a hold of you, and it was important, he would just send back-to-back texts and call repeatedly back-to-back until you answered. So on this day, when Dylan and Mark were out of town on like a trip, Corey was seeing a movie with some friends, and he started getting these repeated calls and texts from Dylan. So he left the theater, he opened his texts, and he saw a text from Dylan that said, "Hey, send me those poop pics of Papa because he gave me a speech about you guys being a bad example, and I want to show him who really is." And this was in August of 2012, 3 months before Dylan vanished. Corey said that he didn't send the pictures to Dylan because he didn't want to add fuel to an already raging fire, but Dylan asked for them over and over again. 7 requests for these pictures in total. So he's obviously thinking about this. He's obviously annoyed. He wants these pictures in case he ever wants to confront his father about them, in case his father keeps talking shit about his mother and his brother, and he can pull it out and be like, really? Do you have any place to talk? So the reason that Corey and Mark weren't talking at this point was because a few months before this, Corey and Mark had gotten into it when Mark sent him a text with like a picture complaining about the way Corey had left the house when he'd been there with his girlfriend. I guess Corey had left some like liquor bottles and dishes out, and Mark, sent a text being like, "Oh, like, why'd you leave my house like this?" And Corey at this point, he's fed up with Mark's self-righteous attitude. And he sent his father the pictures he'd taken from Mark's computer, and he texted, "I've got some pictures too." And Corey also said some other things like, "You are what you eat," "Look in the mirror," "You disgust me," stuff like that. And Mark responded in anger. He said Corey was a thief. Corey was just trying to hurt Mark like Elaine, and Corey should not tell Dylan about the pictures because Dylan had been hurt enough, and if Corey really cared about Dylan, he wouldn't hurt him any further. So at this point, we know that Dylan has not confronted his father about these pictures yet because Mark wouldn't be telling Corey not to show Dylan the pictures if he already knew about them. But investigators believe that this Thanksgiving weekend, when Dylan was with his father and ended up dead, Dylan could no longer hide his contempt for Mark. And he told him that he'd seen the pictures, and he told him just what he thought about him, which spun Mark into a blind rage, leading to Dylan becoming mortally wounded. It's pretty obvious that these pictures were a trigger for Mark and his temper. After it was proven that Dylan was in fact dead, a friend of Elaine's had a very heated exchange with Mark outside of his home. Apparently, Mark had texted Elaine about a friend of hers, a woman named Denise Hess, who is now dead because Denise Hess had really bad colon cancer. And Mark had texted Elaine, and he said that he hoped her colon cancer-riddled BFF died, and that she did too. So another friend, Kathy Berry, a friend of Denise's, she took Denise over to Mark's house because Denise was upset about these statements and they wanted to confront him. So Denise and Kathy, they're like, why'd you say that? And Mark just laughed. He thinks it's a big joke at this point. And he kept talking shit about Denise's cancer. And he said something about, her taking her last breath, to which Kathy Barry responded she would make sure with her last breath that he paid for what he had done to Dylan. So talking about Dylan's death, it doesn't trigger Mark. He still thinks it's a joke at this point. And he responded saying that he would dance. He would dance when Denise was dead. And this caused Kathy to snap, and she brought up those pictures, at which point she claims his demeanor completely changed. He got super angry. His eyes were bulging. He picked up a log, and he went, "Arr!" like holding the log, like he was going to chase her and hit her with it. So obviously he's either ashamed of these pictures or he's like super proud of them. And he's like, why don't people see how cool this is? Like, why would you talk negatively about these pictures? Don't you see how happy I am just eating shit? In April of 2013, there were still people out looking for Dylan, who had not been found yet. And around this time, Mark, Elaine, and Corey went on the Dr. Phil show, where Elaine and Corey pretty much said they thought Mark had done something to Dylan. Corey suggested that maybe Mark had paid someone to take Dylan and hide him as a way to punish Elaine, and Dr. Phil asked Mark to take a polygraph, but he refused. He said, I don't think it's the best time for a polygraph right now. While the searchers were still combing the area around Vallecito Lake where Dylan's scent had been picked up, Elaine's husband, Michael Hall, he was part of the search and he had to pee. So he drove a few minutes away to what he thought was an isolated area on Middle Mountain Road. Mike had thought that this area would be deserted because it should have been, because Middle Mountain Road is, it's up in the mountains, and it's not all paved, and it's pretty much closed off during the winter months due to the heavy snow and the, dangerous driving conditions. And this was why crews hadn't searched the area yet. They were waiting for spring and for the snow to melt. Now, this road's actually blocked off during the winter months with like a sign. It's like no cars, blocked off, because it's dangerous to drive on the roads during this time. So Mike's going to pee. It's still snowing. It's April. There's still snow up in the mountains. Nobody should be there. And he saw Mark Redwine hurtling down Middle Mountain Road in his pickup truck. While just a few miles away, a search is going on for his son, even though he's never helped search, but he has time to drive around an area he shouldn't even be in. Mike said it was strange because when Mark saw him, he took off as if he was like running away, as if he didn't want to be seen. So Mike pursued him. He followed him all the way to where the unpaved roads of Middle Mountain Road hit paved roads. And Mike was so suspicious. I mean, rightly so. What the hell is Mark Redwine doing in this area? So Mike installed motion-activated trail cameras along Middle Mountain Road so that he could see if Mark went there and what Mark was doing while he was there. In June, the snow had melted enough so that teams were finally able to move to the Middle Mountain Road area and search. And an investigator with the local police, Tom Crowling, he claimed that he had reached out to Mark to see if he could help with the search, but Mark didn't answer. He didn't answer his phone. He didn't answer his calls or texts. Later, he told Crowling that his cell phone had fallen into the sink, gotten wet, and stopped working. But pretty soon after that, his cell phone was found in his briefcase, and Mark was like, oh, look at that. My cell phone works again. What? On June 26, 2013, the partial remains of 13-year-old Dylan Redwine were found in a wooded area off Middle Mountain Road, just a few miles from Mark's home. Really, right around the area that Mark was seen by Michael Hall. A femur was found, a scapula was found, and some other remains, as well as human toes or fingers that were found in animal excrement in the same area. They also found scraps of a t-shirt that Dylan had owned from an event or a concert or something he'd attended with his father. They found a pair of earbuds, like to listen to music. They found one shoe and one sock and the elastic band from a pair of underwear. Dylan's skull was not located with these remains. The initial set of remains were found by a search team just off an ATV path, and 2 days later, a coroner confirmed that the bones did belong to Dylan, but he was unable to determine cause of death due to the fact that he only had access to very little of the remains and no skull. The coroner did say with some certainty that he did not believe Dylan had been killed by animals. On August 14th, Mark Redwine's home was searched for a second time. This time, the sheriff's office called in a dog handler named Karen Guman with her dog, Molly. Molly was brought to the La Plata County Sheriff's Office, where she was presented with 3 evidence bags. The evidence bags had a pair of shoes in them, like tennis shoes, a pair of jeans, and like a shirt in the other one, so they're all separated. Molly signaled for the scent of human remains on all 3 bags. These bags held the clothes of Mark Redwine, the clothes he had been wearing on the day his son vanished. At Mark's house, Molly signaled again near the garage, and Karen, Molly's handler, said there was a large amount of human remains odors detected on the exterior of the property. Inside, Molly signaled 7 times on the main floor and 0 times on the second floor. Molly indicated the scent of human remains in the back of Mark Redwine's truck. And Molly indicated several times for the scent of human remains on Middle Mountain Road. Along with Mark's cell phone that wasn't working, apparently, a debit card with Dylan's name on it was found in Mark's briefcase, a debit card that would normally be in Dylan's wallet, which hadn't been found. Dylan's wallet was never found, Dylan's iPod was never found, Dylan's cell phone was never found. I also want to jump ahead quickly to 2016 so I don't forget, because if we're going with the timeline, it's going to take a while to get there, but in August of 2016, investigators got a tip that Mark Redwine had thrown out a bunch of stuff. So they went right over to his garbage and they grabbed what he had discarded, which they have the legal right to do. Among other things, they found pictures of Dylan, ranging in ages 10 to 13, and pictures of Dylan's mother, Elaine. So Mark's son is dead. You're never going to see him again. And what you do when you realize you're never going to see him is throw out his pictures. And don't tell me that he threw them out because he was innocent and it was just too hard to look at him. Don't do that. Don't do it. You're not his attorney. You're not Mark's defense attorney. You don't need to come up with creative ways to make him look innocent. Just a few days later, Mark Redwine was named an official person of interest in the murder of his son, but it would be 2 years before Dylan's skull was found, telling us how he really died. On November 1st, 2015, Dan Foster and his wife were hiking off of Middle Mountain Road when they spotted what looked like a skull in a meadow. Now, later, Mark's lawyers would try to argue that bears had taken Dylan and killed him. There's just this family of bears had just seen Dylan walking and they were like, "Get over here," rah, and they grabbed him and they ran away with him. But the experts would refute this on like every single level. First, a wildlife expert named Heather Johnson testified that most bears are in hibernation by November. And even if they weren't, which they are, most animals would not carry prey or something they were scavenging over long distances. So they're not going to see something that they want to eat and be like, "Oh, great, I want to eat this little boy, but let's bring him to a more peaceful place. We can, play some music, light some candles, have a really romantic dinner." Dylan's skull was found further up the mountain from where his other remains had been located, about 1.5 miles through very rough terrain. So this expert, Heather Johnson, she's like, no, the bears aren't going to take him and then bring him to the place his remains had first been found and kill him and then say oh, let's take his skull 1.5 miles up the mountain. Dylan's remains had been scavenged by wild animals, obviously. That's going to happen, especially in that area. However, he'd also suffered a skull fracture that happened around the time he was killed. And there were 2 small marks on his skull that appeared to have been made by a kitchen knife or some other sharp object or tool. Forensic pathologist Robert Kurtzman determined that Dylan had been murdered and said, quote, "It's not natural in any way to have skeletal remains with cut marks found in an open environment. It doesn't happen in nature. Bears don't carry knives," end quote. You gotta love a forensic pathologist with a sense of humor. Bears don't carry knives. So we have a blunt force trauma found to be the cause of Dylan's death. And how does this tie back to Mark Redwine? I mean, since we know that a bear didn't just bop him over the head. Well, Dylan had another brother, a half-brother from Mark Redwine's earlier marriage to a woman named Betsy Horvath. Dylan's half-brother was a man named Brandon Redwine, and he was old enough to be married with children at this point. So he found out that Dylan was missing from Corey, and he immediately got his wife and kids, and they drove from Gilbert, Arizona to join the search for Dylan. One night, while Brandon was in Durango, he, Corey, Mark, and Mark's brother, David, had a meeting at a casino in December of 2012. Now, this meeting was supposedly to lay out a plan. What next? We're not finding Dylan where we're searching. Where should we search next? Mark, where do you think he could be? Think of anything. And all of them, Corey, Brandon, and Mark's brother, David, all urged Mark to show more initiative in searching for his son. They were like, you got to get out there, man. You got to show your face. People are talking. So the next day, in a demonstrative show of nothingness, Mark was like, let's go, guys. Let's go. Let's search for Dylan on Middle Mountain Road because they haven't gotten there yet because of the snow and everything. Let's just see if we see anything. We'll just go there. So Mark drove Brandon, Corey, and David up Middle Mountain Road, the place where Dylan's remains would eventually be found, because at this point, it's December of 2012, so his remains haven't even been found yet. I'm sorry I keep going back and forth. He drove for about 20 minutes before suddenly stating that Dylan wasn't there, and then he turned around. At that point, Brandon claimed that Mark knew something. He didn't know what he knew or how he knew it, but he knew that he knew more than the rest of them, and he wasn't talking about it. After Dylan's partial remains were found, Brandon said Mark appeared stoic and he didn't appear upset or sad. And when he and Brandon would discuss the fact that only a few bones of Dylan's had been found, and Brandon was like, what do you think happened? Like, where do you think Dylan could be? What do you think happened to him? Mark would continue to use the term blunt force trauma way more than he needed to. And this confused Brandon, obviously, because by this time Dylan's skull hadn't been found yet. And it was just weird sort of speculation, to even say that when you don't know what happened to Dylan, especially when you're out there being like, oh, animals got him. And Brandon said that when Mark talked about blunt force trauma, he did so in a very direct and passionate way, like he knew what he was talking about. Brandon said, quote, I remember telling my wife, he's telling me what happened, and he's not telling me exactly what was used, but we don't have enough information to be thinking about blunt force trauma. It just shocked me a bit because I didn't see where it was coming from. End quote. Additionally, Brandon's mother and Mark's first wife, Betsy Horvath, told law enforcement that she and Mark had been married for 6 years, and in the mid-'80s they'd gone on a family trip into the mountains together, and Mark had made a comment that this mountainous, isolated area would be a great place to get rid of a body. From the moment Dylan went missing, Betsy Horvath was worried. She was worried that Mark had done something to Dylan because during her own divorce to Mark and the following custody discussions, Mark had told Betsy that he would kill their kids before he let her have them. Dylan went missing in 2012. Only small portions of his remains were found in 2013, and in 2015 his skull was found. It would take another 2 years before Mark Redwine was finally in handcuffs and charged with second-degree murder and child abuse resulting in death. Now, why is it second-degree murder? Because according to law enforcement and the prosecution, the murder of Dylan Redwine was not premeditated. It had happened in a fit of rage, a crime of passion, so to speak. Mark was probably trying to connect to Dylan, probably trying to make him not mad at him. Dylan finally exploded and was like, I know about the pictures, you disgust me, I don't want to have anything to do with you, and after I leave this trip, this visit, I'm going to tell the courts about those pictures and that I don't want to have anything to do with you. And the judge won't make me come back. This is just my speculation, but I can imagine that Dylan, being as upset as he was, most likely said something like that, and then Mark snapped, so it wasn't premeditated. I think, personally, anytime you kill a child, it should be considered first-degree murder and should come with the death penalty. But that's just my opinion. Don't come for me. Mark Redwine was found guilty of these charges, second-degree murder and child abuse resulting in death, and his sentencing hearing will happen this October. But because he's been found guilty of second-degree murder, which is only a Class 2 felony in the state of Colorado, he could be behind bars for as little as 8 years or as many as 48 years. Being that Mark is in his 50s, let's hope it's the latter, for society's sake. And for the sake of that 13-year-old boy who'd already lost trust in his father, who'd already felt betrayed and confused, who'd already had to witness his family being split up, and who was crushed one last time by the man who was supposed to teach him right from wrong. The man who was supposed to teach him how to love, how to be a good person. And instead, Mark killed him because he was mad, because he decided to take some disgusting pictures of him dressed in a woman's bra wearing makeup eating shit. So I try to find the light in every one of these cases. This is harder to do so. I mean, a lot of them are harder. It's devastating. Corey, when he testified at his father's trial, he was obviously upset. And he said, it's my father. I still love my father. I wish I didn't have to be here. But he's also not going to let Mark walk because it's his father. So this is very hard for him. However, Elaine Redwine, Dylan's mother, she has tried to turn this into something that will help others. So according to this article from the Journal, though the pain of losing her son will never heal, Elaine Hall said a law she helped pass, making tampering with the deceased body a felony, offers at least a little respite. She says, quote, the healing process is obviously day by day, and I'm not sure I'll ever fully heal. But seeing it used, I'm happy with that. It puts some meat behind the other charges. So it says that Elaine started working around 2016 with another mother, Laura Saxton, whose child, Kelsey Schelling, was murdered and her body was never found. And they worked together to make tampering with a dead body a more severe crime. The two mothers would talk to state politicians and spoke at a Colorado Legislative Committee meeting in favor of making the punishment harsher. In 2016, their efforts were successful, elevating tampering with a body from a misdemeanor to a Class 3 felony. The charge now carries a sentence of up to 12 years in prison and is usually tacked on to more serious crimes like murder. Elaine Hall said, quote, I couldn't believe it wasn't already a felony in Colorado. To me, it was very common sense, end quote, right? Just like killing a child should be a first-degree murder charge. That's just common sense. This article goes on to say the charge was used in the case of Chris Watts, who pleaded guilty in 2018 to killing his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters. Watts was sentenced to several life sentences, 48 years for unlawful termination of pregnancy, and 12 years for 3 counts of tampering with a deceased body. In March, Letitia Stout, who was accused of killing her 13-year-old stepson earlier this year, was also charged with tampering with a deceased body. A report in the Montrose Daily Press in January said that there have been 34 charges and 12 convictions for tampering with a deceased body since it became a felony in 2016. 6th Judicial District Attorney Christian Champagne, what a cool name, Christian Champagne, he said it's important to make the crime a felony instead of a misdemeanor, saying, quote, "When we see someone who's doing inappropriate things with the remains of our loved ones, I think it strikes many people as a very serious crime." End quote. Champagne also said prosecutors can use the charge if there's a lack of evidence for more serious crimes in a case. He said, quote, "It's a tool we can use when we don't have the evidence and still get some accountability for someone who has hidden a body or moved someone's remains to avoid detection." End quote. So this is awesome, actually. Because of what happened to Dylan, Elaine went and she worked with this other mother and she got this law passed. And as a result, 2 people that I hate very much, 2 people I hate probably more than anybody in the world, because I don't hate a lot of people. In fact, I would say the only people I truly hate are like murderers. Okay, so I hate lots of murderers, but I hate Letitia Stout and Chris Watts more than any other murderers. I hate them so much. Oh, and Casey Anthony, we can't forget. But anyways, we'll focus. So these 2 people that I hate so much, they were able to be brought to justice on these charges, tampering with a deceased body, because of what Elaine did, because of what happened to Dylan. And I'm sure that if Dylan is someplace aware or watching, whatever you believe in, I don't know, I'm sure he's proud. I'm sure he's very, very proud of his mother and what she's accomplished. And I'm sure he's, depending on what you believe in, this is just what I say to make myself feel better, but I hope that he's somewhere with Gannon Stout and Cece Watts and Bella Watts and Nico Watts, and they're all holding hands and they're watching as this happens and as the people who hurt them face real justice. I don't know if Elaine's watching this, or probably not. I wouldn't. But if you are, that's an amazing thing you did. And your son, although he is not with you, would have turned into an amazing young man. He had a voice. He was strong. He wasn't easily manipulated, even though some kids at that age can be by their parents. Your father tells you your mom sucks, and all of a sudden you start turning against your mom. No, not Dylan. Dylan defended his mother. He defended his brother. He defended the people that he loved and cared about because his loyalty was very strong. And he would have turned into just an incredible young man that you would be proud of. And if he's somewhere out there watching you, he is incredibly, incredibly proud of you. I hope that brings some sort of happiness, I don't know, a sense of having done something good to make the world better. And as for Mark Redwine's ex-girlfriend, what was her name? Karen? The one who said that she witnessed Dylan cutting his finger. She basically tried to, I think she was lying, okay? Maybe she wasn't. I think she was lying. I think Mark convinced her to lie for him. I wonder why she would lie for him. Maybe she knew more than we thought, or maybe she knew more about the situation than we know, and Mark threatened to talk about her part in the situation if she didn't do it. I don't know why she lied, allegedly. I think she lied. But it's disgusting. But when you look at Mark and what he was into behind the scenes, the makeup, the women's lingerie, the eating shit out of a diaper, you have to wonder what kind of person would date him, right? So I don't think she's right in the head, just like I don't think he's right in the head. I don't think Mark is like clinically insane. I don't think there's anything going on there that would explain or justify what he did to his son. But he's clearly a messed up person who's into some really weird stuff. And listen, I'm very libertarian. Like, whatever you want to do in the privacy of your own home, in your bedroom, whatever, that's on you, as long as you're not hurting anyone, okay? I don't care what you do. But I can still say it's gross. It's gross. It's weird. It's gross. It's weird. It shouldn't happen. I don't even know. I don't even know what the mind of someone who enjoys doing something like that is like. So I'm going to end it there because I'm getting agitated, grossed out. And I went to the chiropractor last night and my neck is killing me, which makes me grumpy. It hurts. It hurts a lot. So I'm going to go down some water because I was supposed to do that after the chiropractor. And I really didn't. And I'm going to edit this video and get it up. And then in 2 days, 4 days? What day is today? I'm recording this on Thursday. Friday, Saturday, Monday morning, I leave for Nashville, where I will be meeting with my co-host on my podcast, Crime Weekly, Derek Levesser. We're going to go there for Podcast Movement. It's a convention in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's all for podcasting and like how to improve your podcasting and networking and stuff like that. So I'm super, super excited. I've never been to Nashville before. I've been to Knoxville, not Nashville, but I really want to go. I've always wanted to go to Nashville. And so if you guys have recommendations of amazing karaoke places, like bars, whatever, in Nashville, let me know, because I try to, find a really good karaoke place every place I go. But we will be there from the 2nd to the 6th. So this is going to go out, and then there probably won't be any content for like the first week of August, even though I'll be working on content while I'm gone and writing videos that I can record when I get back, and also working on Halloween because that is right around the corner. So thank you guys so much for being here. Like the video if you liked it. Not if you liked what happened to Dylan, but if you liked getting exposure for Dylan and hearing about what happened to Dylan. And share the video if you think it's worth sharing. Subscribe if you haven't, and if you are already subscribed, make sure you still are, because YouTube sometimes likes to unsubscribe people from my channel, even though they should be really proud of me because I didn't put those pictures in. I didn't put those pictures in because I know they wouldn't want it. They should be like giving me a break here. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to my Patreons for having my back and always being there for me when I need to like rant or chat. I appreciate you guys so much. Stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe. Literally, a news alert just popped up on my computer about a plane crash. And as somebody who is afraid of flying and who's boarding a plane in a couple of days, it's not what I wanted to see. But anyways, stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe. Hope that I stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Straight down, and that river runs deep. The mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name. Better say I Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood on the strings.